I drink your milkshake.
For 50 years, and this brings back to gold a little bit. And the reason I'm coming back to gold right now is with the debt ceiling here, this idea of the platinum coin, has come back up, or, remonetize gold in order to solve the debt problem. Now, the reason that I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon, although I understand how it could happen and why it could happen, is because for 50 years, the central banks around the world and the governments around the world, for the most part, have tried to demonetize gold, get gold out of the monetary system. They've tried to kind of delegitimize it, for lack of a better way of saying, oh, if anybody wants gold, oh, they're a crazy gold bug, And if you don't think that's real, I think that is real. I think they've waged a campaign to demonetize and delegitimize gold over the last 50 years, and I think they've been largely successful in doing it. So for them to just automatically come out next week or 2 weeks from now at the Fed meeting and said, you know what, we've solved all of our problems, we're going to remonetize gold at $20,000 and, everything's going to be solved. I think it's just not reality, right? They may do that at some point, but that's going to be like as a last ditch effort when they have exhausted every other opportunity. And I just think there's a lot of other things they can do before it gets to that. And I think all those things could take several years before it comes to that. Now, that doesn't mean that gold can't go to $5,000 before they actually put it back into the monetary system or before they use it as some way to kind of, recollateralize the system. And that's what I've always said, is that I don't think that we're going back to a gold standard anytime soon, and probably not ever. But it doesn't mean that gold won't go up a lot anyway. And so that's why I want to own it, because whether they bring it back in and re-legitimize it or not, gold will still put itself forth as a possible solution. So it's kind of all that stuff put together of why I think we could still have 5 or 10 years to go. And the other thing I would say is that, a lot of people will say, but Brent, that just doesn't make sense. You can't just keep kicking the can down the road. It's non-economic. And so I agree with you, but, communism in many ways doesn't make sense either. And the communist system doesn't make a lot of sense either. But the Soviet ruble lasted for 50 or 60 years. So, the idea that just because something doesn't make sense doesn't mean it can't last is historically provably wrong. And it's for many of these reasons that I think you've got to understand and keep an open mind about what can happen, again, in chapters 5 through 9, rather than just focusing on number 10. Anyway, that was a very long tirade, soapbox, whatever you want to call it. But that's kind of why I think it could take a lot longer.
Yeah, good. I mean, it's good to kind of have that comprehensive overview of partly where you've come, and also the fact that you're aware of these other factors, but it's, it really does answer the question I proposed of, where are we on this timeline, and why are we at that place in the timeline? And again, we don't know. There's something we hammer on a lot about, which is this isn't a matter of certainty. It's more a matter of conviction. And we're all kind of just trying to navigate as the ocean moves us back and forth. But while we're on kind of this topic of the governments, what they can do, some of those responses and coordinated responses that were used during 2020. And it's something that, you were referencing with the MMT got me thinking about. And I want to speak specifically, so we don't get too off the rails, about the U.S., because the U.S. as the reserve currency, ultimately for things to work, I feel like needs to be running deficits. They're uniquely capable of doing that. But what is specifically with the U.S., when you're talking about MMT, the real role potentially of government debt, and specifically taxation? Because many would argue, and I kind of feel like this ideologically, that tax doesn't need to really exist, and we kind of proved that to some extent in 2020, because governments everywhere were just monetizing the debt. And now you're bringing up this issue with the debt ceiling. Oh, we can't issue more bonds. Well, Yellen could come along and just send money out everywhere, and the central bank could offset the inflationary impact by continuing to raise rates and various forms of QT. So why is debt Why do we even need debt in that environment? And therefore, why do we need taxation outside of maybe providing the world a financial instrument in which they can access dollar liquidity?
So this is a very broad. This is it's an excellent question, and it kind of goes to the heart of everything. And it's such a big topic, though, that I got to figure out the right way to frame this so that it's understandable in a simple manner. So there's kind of two parts here. What's the right way? Maybe the right way. Let's think about this like at Christmas time, right? Now, there's two stories that are told. There's one household where the dad and mom, they're just brutally honest. And they say, yeah, there is no Santa Claus, but we're going to go along with the game. And when you wake up on Saturday morning or Christmas morning, there's going to be some presents under the tree. But don't believe any of that ridiculous hokum that your friends are telling you about some, fat guy in a red suit coming down the chimney, right? And in the other household, they're saying, oh, this is amazing. One time a year, this fat guy in a suit comes flying around on his magic sleigh, and he drops down into the chimneys while you're asleep, and he leaves presents for you, and he's been listening to everything you've done all year, right? But the reality is either way, there's presents under the tree the next morning, right? And you can kind of choose which story to believe, but the reality is Christmas morning, there's the presents. It's kind of like that with the monetary system. And what I mean by that is you can kind of dress it up and pretend it's a little bit nicer and prettier than what it actually is. And I don't know this for sure, but I think what Warren Mosler and Stephanie Kelton would say is that the fact that we borrow money from the public and then we use that to then pay for goods and services is much like, it's the way we dress it up to make it look like we're actually somewhat responsible, as opposed to just telling you this is how we're doing it, right? Because, what they would say is the government doesn't need to borrow money. They can just spend it into existence. And then people would say, okay, that's very inflationary. You can't just spend it into existence. Because if you just keep spending it, there'll be more and more of it, and therefore that would be very inflationary. Okay, that's true. So what, the MMTers will say then, well, the way you keep the supply from just growing at an absurd rate and leading to high inflation is you take some of that supply back every year. And you take it back either in the form of debt that you're selling to them, or you take it back in the form of taxes, and you regulate the supply that way. And the reality is it's kind of the chicken and the egg. Which came first, right? Where does the government get money? Well, they get it from the people by taxing them. Okay, well, where did the people get the money? Well, they got it from the government. In other words, nobody walked out one day and found a dollar bill on the ground, right? The government had to create that money and put it into the system. So now I know that there's people out there saying, yeah, but that's not real money. That's currency. Only gold is money. Okay. Then we get back to this, what's really money? Is gold money or is fiat currency money? And I think in order to survive chapters 5 through 9, and I keep coming back to this, I think you have to see things from both point of views, because there's going to be times where one or the other is going to be the prevailing view, and you're going to have to understand how that works in order to survive the challenges that come in those chapters. So I know I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I hope this makes sense. So you've got the two systems. One is like you've got money that's decided by the market, which is gold. That's everybody decided to use gold because gold has value. And in the other system, you have fiat currency where the government said this is what you're going to use. One of them is regulated by the supply of gold, and the other one is regulated by the tax impact or the treasury debt of the government, right? But under both of them are regulated either by nature or by law, by diktat from the government. Okay, so I'm trying to think of the right way to a good analogy to use. Okay, so both systems are accurate, just like the parents putting the presents under the tree, and the fact that there's going to be presents there, if you never found out that there wasn't a Santa Claus, in your reality, that's the way it works, right? And I think many people don't like the MMT story because they don't like revealing that that's actually the way it works. And in some ways, that's kind of hard to get your head around. Whereas, the MMT suppliers are saying, or the MMT proponents are saying, well, this all this ridiculousness about the debt ceiling is it's totally nonsensical. It's putting handcuffs on us that we don't need to have. Governments are not like households. They play from it's like somebody at the blackjack table. The players are not the same as the dealers, right? The players are not the same as the house. You have to look at it from a different point of view. And all of these types of, fiscal policies that we try to put on the government are really just window dressing when we don't really need to think of it that way. Now, again, I'm not saying I necessarily agree with all this. I'm just saying these are the two different ways you have to look at it. One of the things that's kind of helped me think about it this way is, let's pretend you got thrown in prison. You did something bad and you got thrown in prison. And you walk in there and you're scared you're scared out of your mind. You don't know how anything works. But then, after you settle down, you kind of start looking around, you see, the different prisoners are trading sardines back and forth among themselves. And somebody wants a magazine, they hand them a pack of sardines or whatever it is. And you finally figure out that, whatever money is in prison is what the biggest, baddest guy says it is. And if that's what you use as currency, then that's what's used as currency. Now, I would love it if somebody got through. I would love to be able to videotape a gold bug getting thrown in jail, trying to get a magazine in prison, and the big bad guy says, well, you need to give me a can of sardines. And the gold bug tries to explain to the big bad guy that sardines aren't really money. What you really need is gold. Right? Well, it doesn't matter if you think gold is money. The big bad guy doesn't think gold is money, and he can't get access to gold. So you got to pay me in my sardines. And if you don't pay me in my sardines, really, really bad things are going to happen. Well, that's kind of how a country is. Think of a country like a prison, right? Now, some countries are nicer prisons than other prisons, and some are locked down really tight. You can't even get out of your cell for very many hours a day. And, you got to do what the prison guards say, and you got to follow the rules of the big bad guys and the gangs in prison. Other prisons are you have a little bit more leeway. You don't have to stay in your cell every day. You can go out, maybe go out to the recreation yard and you go lift weights. And some of them even have work release programs. You can leave for a little while. You can go somewhere else for a little while, but you got to come back at the end of the day, That's kind of like when you get your passport stamped and you go to Spain. Well, at some point you got to come back. And if you don't come back, then, you're in trouble. So I guess my point is you got to learn, even though you understand fundamentally why gold would be decided to be money if we had a free market, it's important to understand that we do not have a free market. And you have to play by the rules of the big bad guys. Now, you don't have to play by the rules, but you at least better understand their rules in order to survive. Because if you just ignore their rules, they will come find you, right? And so that's why I say we can get into this situation where all of these things can be going on in the prison, and the big bad guys and the gangs can be putting all these different policies in place. Maybe some of them make sense, maybe some of them don't. And outside the walls of the prison, there's a stack of gold, and maybe it's going up in value every day, but that's not the reality you live in, right? You live in the reality where there's walls and there's rules, and the big bad guys are going to come take you if you don't follow those rules. And that's why I think it's important to understand both sides, because it's fine if your gold stack is going up in value, but unless you're going to sell it, what good is it doing you when you're acting in the regular everyday environment, right? And if you're in prison and you have this big stack of gold hidden outside the walls once you get outside the walls, you can go collect that, you still have to survive the rules inside the walls until you can break out and get to it. And we live in this world with walls. And unfortunately, the people that are running these places are losing control. And as they lose control, they're going to start to try to clamp down even harder. And I think that they are going to be able to remain in control due to their tightening of restrictions, or however you want to say it, longer than many people think they're going to. And it's fine for you to have this escape hatch outside the walls, but you better understand the rules of the game inside, or you're not going to survive to get to it. And so I feel like I spend a lot of my time talking about what's going on inside the walls, even though I know that many people want to get outside the walls and go pick up that, that stack of gold that they have, or the Bitcoin, or whatever escape hatch they have. So again, that was a very long, rambling kind of analogy, but I hope it sort of makes sense.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun conversations, both I think on camera for the show and just off air. That one was a good one for me. I've never heard you kind of on the spot like that crystallize that analogy, and I think it was brilliantly done. I like the Santa Claus. I like the jail or prison reference. I'm a little disappointed you didn't sneak in a Attack on Titan reference when you started talking about the walls.
You know what? Honestly, if it's funny you say that, John. Everybody should. If everybody wants to understand what the hell's going on in the world, you should watch the Attack on Titan. Yeah,
so Attack on Titan is an anime series, and make sure you block out a huge chunk of time to watch it, because it's funny talking about that, because as you're explaining in this conversation how the timeline can go much longer than you think, I think Attack on Titan somehow just went way longer than you ever expected.
That is a perfect analogy. That is just when you think it's about over, just when you about think you understand what's going on, there's a whole paradigm shift. Exactly. That's a perfect analogy. Go watch Attack on Titan.
There you go. So what is what's the quote or saying in your Twitter bio about magic?
Oh, you either believe in math or you believe in magic. And the point with all this is that eventually the math is going to play out. All of this debt, all of the crazy shenanigans that are going on will collapse, for lack of a better way of saying it. But it can go on a really long time. And so I think it's important to understand the math, but you also have to kind of appreciate the magic, right? And the politicians and the monetary authorities, they're fantastic magicians.